Ma Jiefu. There was a scholar in the city of Daming named Yang Wanshi, who was known for his extreme fear of his wife. His wife's surname was Yin, and she possessed an unusually fierce temperament. The slightest disagreement from her husband would result in her whipping him mercilessly. Yang Wanshi's father, aged over 60 and a widower, was treated by Yin as if he were a servant. Yang Wanshi and his younger brother, Yang Wanzhang, would often sneak some food to their father without Yin's knowledge. However, because their father often wore ragged clothes that barely covered him, fearing ridicule, the brothers never allowed their father to meet any guests. At the age of over 40, Yang Wanshi had no children yet, so he took a concubine named Wang, and the two of them rarely spoke a word to each other throughout the day. Once, Yang's brothers were in the county town waiting for the local examination. They met a young man, handsome and elegant, and began conversing with him. Inquiring about his name, the young man responded, "My surname is Ma, and my given name is Jiefu." From that moment, their bond grew stronger, and before long, they became sworn brothers. After parting ways, about half a year later, Ma Jiefu suddenly visited the young brothers with his servant. Just as he arrived, Yang Wanshi's father was sitting outside the front gate, sunbathing while picking lice from his clothes. Mistaking him for a servant of the young family, Ma Jiefu introduced himself and requested to see the master, having the father report to him. Yang's father put on his worn cotton clothes and entered the house. Someone informed Ma Jiefu that the old man was actually Yang Wanshi's father. Still surprised, Ma Jiefu met the well-dressed young brothers as they welcomed him outside. After exchanging greetings inside, Ma Jiefu requested to meet his adoptive father. Yang Wanshi declined, citing his father's illness as a reason he couldn't receive guests, insisting that Ma Jiefu sit down. As the three engaged in conversation, time passed unnoticed, and night fell. Yang Wanshi mentioned several times that the food and wine were ready, yet they were not served. The brothers alternated go in and out multiple times, and finally, a thin servant brought a wine jug. In no time, the wine was finished. They waited a long time before Yang Wanshi repeatedly went out to urge for the meal, sweating profusely from anxiety. After a while, the same servant brought some food. Unfortunately, the meal was not palatable, making it difficult to swallow. After finishing the meal, Yang Wanshi left hurriedly. Yang Wanzhang brought beddings and stayed to accommodate their guest. Ma Jiefu reproached him, saying, "I initially thought that you brothers had high moral character, which led me to become your sworn brother. But now, I see that your old father is barely eating and wearing anything. People who pass by are surely ashamed for you." Yang Wanzhang teared up and said, "The situation is too embarrassing to be discussed openly. Unfortunate events struck our family, and we married a fierce sister-in-law. The entire family, young and old, male and female, has suffered greatly. If it weren't for our closest friends, we wouldn't dare to reveal this family shame." Ma Jiefu sighed for a moment and said, "I had planned to leave early tomorrow morning. But now that you've told me this extraordinary story, I must witness it with my own eyes. Please lend me an empty room, and I'll prepare food myself." Yang Wanzhang reluctantly agreed, cleaned up a room, and let him stay. Later that night, he secretly brought some vegetables and food from his home, worried that Yin would find out. Ma Jiefu understood his intentions and tried to decline, but Yang Wanzhang insisted. He also invited Yang's father to join, and together, they shared a meal. Ma Jiefu bought some cloth from the city market, made new clothes for Yang's father, and the father and sons were moved to tears. Yang Wanzhang had a 7-year-old son named Sir, who slept with his grandfather and Ma Jiefu. Ma Jiefu gently touched the child and said, "This child's future blessings and longevity will surpass his father's, although he may face some hardships in his youth." Upon hearing about Yang's father's improved situation, Yin was furious. She began shouting and cursing, accusing Ma Jiefu of interfering with their family affairs. Initially confined to her own room, Yin gradually escalated her shouting near Ma Jiefu's room, intentionally letting him hear. Yang's brothers were sweating with anxiety, hesitating to intervene, but Ma Jiefu remained unperturbed by the shouting. 5 months pregnant. Yang Wanshi's concubine, Wang, was beaten by Yin upon discovery, stripped of her clothes. Wang was subjected to Yin's abuse. Yang Wanshi was summoned and made to kneel while Yin tied a woman's headscarf around his head and used a whip to drive him out of the house. Coincidentally, Ma Jiefu was outside, and Yang Wanshi felt too ashamed to step out. Yin continued to whip him, forcing him to leave, unable to bear it. Yang Wanshi ran out of the house, followed by Yin. Shouting and cursing loudly, she stood with her hands on her hips, berating him, drawing a crowd on the street, pointing at Yin. Ma Jiefu shouted back, "Go back inside. Go back inside." Without any choice, Yin reluctantly returned, resembling someone chased by a ghost, with her shoes lost and her cloth bindings trailing on the ground. Finally home, she was ashen-faced. After calming down a bit, her servants brought her shoes and socks, and only then did she start wailing, with nobody daring to console her. Ma Jiefu pulled Yang Wanshi over and tried to take off his headscarf for him. Yang Wanshi stood there motionless, not daring to breathe, as if he feared his headscarf might fall off. After Ma Jiefu forcefully removed it, Yang Wanshi remained uneasy, fearing that privately removing the headscarf might bring more trouble. He continued to feel restless until Yanshi finished crying. Only then did Yang Wanshi muster the courage to return home, moving cautiously and nervously. Seeing him, Yanshi didn't say a word, suddenly stood up, and went to her room to sleep. Yang Wanshi finally relaxed, and both he and his younger brother felt puzzled. The family members were also surprised, gathering together and whispering. Upon hearing some of it, Yanshi felt even more embarrassed and angry. She proceeded to beat the servants one by one and then called for Wang Shi. Wang Shi, who had been injured during a previous beating, was lying in bed and didn't respond. Yanshi accused her of pretending, went to Wang Shi's bedside, and subjected her to a violent beating, causing her to bleed heavily, even inducing a miscarriage. In a secluded place, Yang Wanshi sorrowfully wept in front of Ma Jiefu. After comforting him for a while, Ma Jiefu instructed the servants to prepare food and wine. The two of them drank together, and by then, it was already very late into the night. Despite this, they still didn't allow Yang Wanshi to go home. Meanwhile, alone in her bedroom, Yanshi was fuming with anger over her husband not coming back. Suddenly, she heard the sound of someone prying at the door. Frantically calling for the servants, she found the door wide open, and a giant figure entered, casting a shadow over the entire room, with a fierce and malicious appearance akin to that of a ghost. In a flash, several more people entered, each holding gleaming knives. Yanshi was so terrified that she almost fainted. Before she could even scream, the giant pointed his knife at her throat and warned, "If you dare to scream, I'll kill you on the spot." Yanshi hurriedly took out gold and silver silks, attempting to buy her life. The giant said, "I am a messenger from the underworld. I don't want money. I've come specifically to take the heart of this unruly woman." Yanshi became even more fearful and began kowtowing repeatedly, smashing her head until it bled. The giant paid no attention to her pleas. While listing her crimes, he slashed at her chest with the knife, asking about each matter if she deserved to die for it or not. For each crime he mentioned, he made a cut. By the time he had enumerated Yanshi's heinous acts, dozens of cuts had been made on her chest. Finally, the giant said, "Wang Shi gave birth to a child, also your descendant. How could you be so cruel as to cause her to miscarry? This act cannot be forgiven." He ordered the others to tie her hands and threatened to cut her open and examine her heart. Frightened, Yanshi begged for mercy, repeatedly admitting her guilt, and only then did the giant spare her. After a while, the sound of the door opening and closing was heard. The giant said, "Yang Wanshi has returned. Since you have repented, I'll spare your life for now." With that, they all disappeared. When Yang Wanshi entered the house, he saw Yanshi tied up, her chest covered in crisscrossing knife wounds, too numerous to count. He released her and inquired about the situation. After learning what had happened, he was deeply shocked and secretly suspected that Ma Jiefu was behind it. The next day, Yang Wanshi told Ma Jiefu about the strange events of the previous night, and Ma Jiefu also showed a horrified expression. Since then, Yin Shi's domineering attitude gradually subsided, and for several consecutive months, she stopped scolding people. Ma Jiefu was very pleased and then told Yang Wanshi, "I'll be honest with you. Don't reveal this to anyone. Last time, I used a bit of minor magic to frighten her. Now that she has changed her ways, and you've reconciled, I will take my leave for now." He then packed his things and left. From that day on, Yin Shi actively tried to keep her husband's company every evening, wearing a smile on her face, and catering to him. Yang Wanshi had never experienced such favor before, and he was suddenly taken aback by the attention, feeling restless and unsure of what to do. One evening, Yin Shi remembered the appearance of the giant and trembled in fear. Wanting to please her, Yang Wanshi revealed that the giant was a fake. Hearing this, Yin Shi suddenly sat up and interrogated him thoroughly. Realizing he had slipped up, Yang Wanshi regretted his words, but it was too late. He had to tell the truth. Enraged, Yin Shi began to shout curses. Fearful, Yang Wanshi knelt under the bed, pleading. It was only by 3 in the morning that Yin Shi said, "If you want me to spare you, you must use a knife to make just as many cuts on your chest as you've told me about." She then went to the kitchen to get a kitchen knife. Filled with terror, Yang Wanshi hastily fled the room. Yin Shi grabbed the knife and chased after him, causing chaos in the house. Yang Wanzhong didn't know the details, but shielded his brother. While Yin Shi was still scolding, she suddenly saw Yang, the old man, coming over. Seeing his new robe, her rage surged. She lunged forward, cutting his clothes into shreds and slapping his face, even pulling his beard. Yang Wanzhong saw this and became furious, picking up a stone and throwing it at Yin Shi, hitting her squarely on the forehead. She fell to the ground and died on the spot. Yang Wanzhong said, "As long as our father and brothers can survive, even if I die, I'll have no regrets." He then threw himself into a well and committed suicide. When they pulled him out, he was already dead. Yin Shi regained consciousness shortly after and, upon hearing that Yang Wanzhong had died, felt some relief. After burying Yang Wanzhong, his widow refused to remarry, wanting to stay with her son. Yin Shi frequently abused her, denied her food, and forced her to remarry. Left alone, Yang Wanzhong's son suffered daily beatings from Yin Shi. After the family finished eating, he would be given only a small piece of cold rice to eat. In less than half a year, the child was so emaciated that he was barely breathing. One day, Ma Jiefu suddenly came again, and Yang Wanshi instructed his family not to inform Yin Shi. Ma Jiefu was surprised to see Yang Wanshi dressed in rags again. He heard about Yang Wanzhong's death and sighed in dismay. When Shir heard that Ma Jiefu had come, he ran over and clung to him, reluctant to part, calling out Uncle Ma repeatedly. Ma Jiefu didn't recognize him at first. He examined him closely for a while before realizing that he was Shir. Amazed, he said, "How did the child become so thin?" Yang's father stammered and recounted the story to Ma Jiefu. Ma Jiefu angrily said to Yang Wanshi, "In the past, I said you were not behaving like a human, and I was not wrong. You and your brother are like one single stem. What if the child is killed?" Yang Wanshi remained silent, tears flowing while he hung his head. After a while, Yin Shi learned that Ma Jiefu had arrived. She didn't dare to confront him herself, so she called Yang Wanshi inside. And with a wave of her hand, she slapped him several times, forcing him to chase away Ma Jiefu. Yang Wanshi came out with tears in his eyes, the palm prints on his face still vivid. Ma Jiefu said indignantly, "You can't control her. Can't you divorce her? She abuses your father and caused your brother's death. Yet you endure it silently. How can you live like that?" Yang Wanshi listened, uneasy and seemingly moved. Ma Jiefu continued to provoke him. "If she refuses to leave, you should use force to expel her, even if it means killing her. Don't be afraid. I have a few influential friends in important positions. They will surely help you and keep you safe." Yang Wanshi agreed, fueled by anger, and stormed into the inner room. He happened to meet Yin Shi face to face. Yin Shi confronted him, raising her voice. "What do you want to do?" Yang Wanshi's expression changed immediately. His knees gave in, and almost involuntarily, he knelt down and said, Ma Jiefu advised me to divorce you." Yanshi became even more furious and searched for a knife or stick. Frightened, Yang Wanshi fled from her. Ma Jiefu, full of disdain, said, "You're truly hopeless." He then opened a box, took out some powdered medicine, mixed it with water, and made Yang Wanshi drink it, saying, "This medicine is called husband's revival powder. I hesitate to use it casually because it harms people. Now, circumstances force us to try it." After drinking the medicine, Yang Wanshi suddenly felt a surge of anger rising from his chest, burning like a wildfire. He couldn't endure it even for a moment and dashed into the inner room, roaring like thunder. Yanshi hadn't had a chance to speak when Yang Wanshi kicked her several feet away, causing her to fall to the ground. Then he picked up a stone and mercilessly pummeled her body, hitting her countless times until she was nearly battered and bruised all over. Yanshi's angry curses continued, but Yang Wanshi's rage intensified. He drew a knife from his waist. Yanshi yelled, "You dare to draw your knife? Would you really dare to kill me?" Yang Wanshi remained silent, and with a swift motion, he sliced off a piece of flesh from her thigh, the size of a palm, and threw it on the ground. Just as he was about to cut again, Yanshi's pained screams and pleas for mercy stopped him. Yang Wanshi ignored her, cutting off another piece of flesh. Family members rushed over, alarmed by Yang Wanshi's brutal assault. They managed to pull him out, stopping his rampage. Ma Jiefu approached and held his arm, soothing him with words. Yang Wanshi was still struggling with anger, but Ma Jiefu persuaded him to stay calm. After a while, as the effects of the medicine gradually waned, Yang Wanshi became despondent once more. Ma Jiefu instructed him, "Don't lose heart. The restoration of a man's dignity and honor lies in this act. The fear of a wife isn't formed overnight. It's a process. Think of the past you as dead. You've been reborn today, and you must cleanse yourself of the old ways. If you give up now, it will be irretrievable." With that, Ma Jiefu told Yang Wanshi to go inside and see Yanshi's reaction. When Yanshi saw Yang Wanshi, she was so terrified that she trembled all over. She allowed her maids to help her up, but when she attempted to kneel and crawl over to greet him, Yang Wanshi stopped her. After Yang Wanshi came out and told Ma Jiefu about the situation, both he and his father were relieved. Ma Jiefu then bid farewell, and both father and son tried to keep him there. Ma Jiefu said, "I'm on my way to the East Sea, so I stopped by to see you. We can meet again when I return." Over a month later, Yanshi gradually recovered and was able to get out of bed. She showed great respect towards her husband. However, as time went on, she felt that Yang Wanshi was incapable of controlling her and lacked any other skills. At first, she was affectionate, but gradually she turned to mockery, then insults, and before long, she reverted to her old ways completely. Yang's father couldn't endure it and fled to Hunan to become a Taoist after his house was burned down in a fire. Yang Wanshi also didn't dare to look for him. A year later, Ma Jiefu came again and learned about the situation. He scolded Yang Wanshi for his actions. Immediately, he took shear, and with silver and a luxurious carriage, they left Yang Wanshi behind and departed. Since then, the people in the village looked down on Yang Wanshi. When the imperial examinations were held, it was considered that Yang Wanshi's conduct was disgraceful, and he was stripped of his qualification to participate. Another 4 or 5 years passed, and disaster struck Yang Wanshi's family when their house was consumed by fire, reducing everything to ashes. The fire even spread to neighboring houses. The villagers took Yang Wanshi to the county government, and he was fined a substantial amount of money. Consequently, Yang Wanshi's wealth slowly diminished, and he didn't even have a place to live. The neighboring villagers warned each other not to lend him a house. Yanshi's brothers were furious about her behavior and refused to provide any assistance, preventing her from returning to her maternal home. Left alone, Yang Wanshi had to endure whippings from Yanshi every day. He was only given some leftover cold rice after the family finished eating. In just half a year, he tortured the child into skin and bones, barely clinging to life. One day, Yang Wanshi went to the front of a wealthy household to beg for food. The gatekeeper scolded him and ordered him to leave. After a while, an official came out from the gate. Yang Wanshi quickly knelt on the ground, crying and begging. The official carefully examined him and asked his name. Surprised, he exclaimed, "You're my uncle. How did you become so destitute?" Looking closely, Yang Wanshi recognized him as his younger brother's son, Xier. Unable to hold back, he burst into tears and followed Xier into the house. Inside, he saw grand rooms and lavish decorations. Shortly after, Yang's father came out holding a child. Father and son met, and their eyes welled up with tears. Yang Wanshi then recounted his own experiences. As it turned out, after Ma Jiefu took Xier away, he had been living here all this time. A few days later, Ma Jiefu went to find Yang's father and reunited the family. A teacher was also engaged to educate Xier. When Xier was 15, he passed the county-level examination, and the following year, he passed the imperial examination. Ma Jiefu arranged a marriage for him and was about to bid farewell. The grandfather and grandson clung to him in tears, but Ma Jiefu said, "I'm not an ordinary person. I'm a celestial fox. My fellow immortals have been waiting for me for a long time." With that, he took his leave. As Xier spoke to this point, he couldn't help feeling heartbroken. He remembered the severe abuses he and his maternal aunt, Lady Wang, had endured in the past, making him even more sorrowful. Thus, Xier sent people with money, accompanied by a luxurious carriage, to redeem and bring back Lady Wang. A little over a year later, Lady Wang gave birth to a child, and Yang Wanshi officially took her as his wife. Yinshi followed the butcher for half a year, still as fierce and untamed as before. Once, in a fit of rage, the butcher used a cleaver to pierce a hole in her thigh. He then threaded a pig's bristle rope through the hole, suspending her from the ceiling beam, and went out carrying meat. Yinshi screamed until her voice was hoarse, and the neighbors finally found out. They lowered her down and painfully extracted the rope from the wound. Each pull elicited a shriek of pain that reverberated throughout the neighborhood. From then on, Yinshi trembled in fear whenever she saw the butcher. Although the wound on her thigh eventually healed, the bristle remnants remained embedded in her flesh, causing her to limp when walking. She had to serve the butcher day and night, and couldn't afford to relax for a moment. The butcher was brutish and cruel, beating Yinshi mercilessly every time he returned home drunk, showing no mercy. At this point, Yinshi finally understood the torment she had once inflicted on others, as she experienced the same suffering today. One day, when Xier's wife and Aunt Wang went to the Puchuo temple to burn incense, the neighboring peasant women came to pay their respects. Yinshi also mingled in the crowd but remained in the background, full of distress. Aunt Wang noticed her and deliberately asked, "Who is this?" The household informed her, "She's the wife of Zhang the butcher." Aunt Wang scolded Yinshi to approach and pay her respects. Aunt Wang smiled and said, "Since this woman is the butcher's wife, she should have plenty of meat to eat. Why is she so emaciated?" Hearing this, Yinshi felt both ashamed and resentful. When she returned home, she attempted to hang herself, but the rope was too thin, and she failed to end her life. This only intensified the butcher's disgust towards her. After another year passed, Zhang the butcher died. One day, while on the road, Yinshi encountered Yang Wanshi. When she saw him from a distance, she knelt and crawled toward him, tears streaming down like rain. Yang Wanshi, constrained by his servant's presence, said nothing to her. However, upon returning home, he informed his nephew that he wanted to take Yinshi back, but his nephew strongly disagreed. Yinshi had become an object of disdain among the villagers, and she wandered without a place to call home, surviving by begging with beggars. Yang Wanshi occasionally met her secretly in the wild or in deserted temples. His nephew was ashamed of this and secretly ordered the beggars to humiliate Yang Wanshi. Only after that did he cut off his relationship with Yinshi. The exact details of this matter are unknown. These last lines were written by Bai Gongquan. Yinshi said, "The fear of wives is a common affliction among all men. However, I never thought that in this world, there could exist someone like Yang Wanshi. Isn't that a kind of anomaly?" I once wrote a continuation of the Wonderful Sound Sutra, which I humbly include here to bring a smile to everyone. I believe that heaven created all things, primarily relying on earth to complete the process. A man's aspiration extend in all directions, and he still needs his wife's help. Both of them share the joys of marriage, yet the wife alone endures the pain of 10 months of pregnancy. Laboriously nurturing the children, for 3 years she worries and smiles for them. For the sake of continuing the family line, the man contemplates taking a wife. Seeing the well-end rice pounder, he recalls the wife's toil in managing the household, and his heart fills with tender affection. All of this elevates the woman's status within the home, diminishing the husband's authority. Initially, it's just the wife speaking impolite words, and the husband offers slight resistance. Eventually, the husband responds with courtesy, but the wife doesn't reciprocate. This deepens the man's timidity due to their affection for each other. Once the fierce wife takes her place on the bed, even a strong man turns submissive. As the domineering wife's influence grows, the man loses his ability to confront. Using clothes mallets and wooden pestles, she exclusively beats the husband. Her sharp nails claw at their faces. He endures the lighter blows and flees from the heavier ones, as if receiving lessons from a mother. Whatever the woman says becomes law, and she establishes all the rules. When the woman asserts her authority, stamping her feet and hurling abuses, a crowd gathers to witness. Her absurd clamor and commotion resemble a flock of birds chirping chaotically. Wretchedly, she cries out to the heavens and the earth, disheveled on the bed, or she poses, feigning hanging herself. At these times, even brave men's hearts tremble, and warriors feel the urge to escape. A mighty general, awe-inspiring, becomes a mere shadow upon entering the home. High-ranking officials, frosty-faced, encounter unmentionable matters behind closed doors. Could it be true that women possess the power to command respect without anger, making the mighty tremble without cold? Some of this is understandable. Facing wives as beautiful as celestial beings, it's not a problem to kneel in submission. The most unjust is when a wife is as ugly as a demon, yet the husband reveres her as if she were a deity. At a wife's single shout, nostrils point upward, face tilted in expectation of orders. At a wife's anger, he kneels, pleading for forgiveness. Distinguished scholars are captivated, not recognizing their wives' unattractiveness. Noble individuals sympathize, just as Emperor Zhongzong feared his empress. Singing the reverberation song, he became a target of ridicule. If a father-in-law were rich and influential, elevating someone's status through wealth and favor, currying favor with the wife could be understandable. If marrying into a prosperous family as a dependent, but then being used like a slave, endlessly bowing and scraping to the wife, what's the point of it all? For the impoverished, self-awareness is lacking, enduring the wife's whims as a plea for her tolerance. Yet, some wealthy and powerful individuals cannot avoid upsetting their wives, despite having money and influence. Could it be that luring back a wandering heart and maintaining a warrior's courage depend on a woman's allure? However, you, who willingly shared the same bed with me in life, and wished to be buried alongside me in death, never considered having concubines. And you have always kept me by your side, wanting me exclusively. A wife only resents her husband for carousing with courtesans and neglecting the household, leaving her to spend endless nights on an empty bed. Seeking pleasures outside, they slip away lightly, taking advantage of her slumber. If discovered, they must flee quickly. A fierce wife might mistakenly view her own brothers as rivals and bring shame upon herself. Jealous women tie husbands to bedposts, but upon release, the husband has become a lamb. In remorse, they regret their actions. The time spouses share is short, while the time spent enduring a wife's torment is endless. A man engaging in debauchery outside has brought it upon himself, and enduring a wife's scolding is beyond anyone's control. Meanwhile, bowing and yielding to a wife's unreasonable punishments, even those with sound reason deem this unwarranted. A woman's jealousy can transform a once loving marriage into nothingness. Occasionally, one might unexpectedly encounter friends, good friends who sit down, and a cup of wine cannot be produced. Moreover, the wife issues words to dismiss the guests, and old friendships are estranged, self-imposing a break with friends. Moreover, a wife's cruelty might drive brothers to separate households, leaving husbands to mourn. Abusing children from previous marriages, they let them go hungry and cold. Therefore, the young Shang brothers of the Tang dynasty never married, and when drinking, only brothers were present. Immortal Shang Qiu, over 70 years old, still remained unmarried. In ancient times, when facing such matters, one's inner feelings were filled with unspeakable sorrow. Alas, a wife who should have been a lifelong companion becomes an ulcer growing on the bones. Marrying for beauty. What one acquires is a pain that cuts to the bone. Even a man with a tough exterior is like this. What can a brave man do? Lacking the courage to kill a fierce wife, and unwilling to castrate oneself to break free of a tumultuous marriage. When a fierce woman's jealousy emerges, there's no cure, and a shrewish woman is like a tiger. Fortunately, there's the salvation of Buddhism. A ferocious woman must burn incense and worship Buddha to be saved from the disaster of being boiled in the pot of hell. Only through moving the heavens and appealing to divine beings can one escape the torments of the knife mountain and sword tree in the underworld. In the Pure Land, husbands and wives fly together, and the contentious wives, by reciting Buddhist scriptures, can restore love between spouses and harmony between wives and concubines. In the Buddhist realm, one can eradicate suffering and escape the entanglement of desires. May these passages of mine turn into the sweet nectar that saves all sentient beings.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.